Hi, Wendy.
Hey,
So, I was just going to talk. Actually, the name of my talk is The Seventh Time's the Charm, and I wanted to explain what I meant by that. Um, well, at least we have a saying in the United States. I'm not sure if it's a global saying, but we say the third time's the charm, because sometimes you try something, one or two times it doesn't work, and then on the third time, hopefully, it works. So we say the third time is a charm. Well, I called it this talk the seventh time's the charm because actually, in terms of statistically, when a victim leaves their abuser, they actually statistically return seven times before finally leaving for good. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Um, the deck is stacked against the victim when they're confronted with leaving or not. Abusers work really hard to keep victims in the abusive relationship. And by the way, usually a lot of times when what people might say, and if they don't say it, they're thinking it is, why don't you just leave? And it would be wonderful it was that simple, but unfortunately that it's not. Um, there sometimes there's a real fear of death or worse abuse if they leave. In my case, I actually took my two sons, who were 2 and 6 at the time, and I left when my abuser was at work and just disappeared. So, that fear is real. I obviously was afraid of him because he'd been abusive. He never threatened me that if I left, blah, blah, blah. But it was a real fear. And in some cases, men do actually threaten what they will do if the victim leaves. So actually, a victim's risk of getting killed greatly increases when they're in the process of leaving or have just left. I know that I didn't let my ex know where I was for about a year after I left, and because I was that afraid. And on average, 3 women die at the hands of a current or former intimate partner every day. So that's one of the tragic things about the statistic, that it takes sometimes takes seven times of leaving before people finally leave. And in the meantime, it's possible that obviously that the woman, abusers usually escalate, so the woman is the possibility of getting even more seriously harmed or unfortunately killed. Um, and another thing is that batterers are very good at making victims believe the abuse is their fault. Um, and yeah, I can I can testify to that one. And that's one of, obviously that's one of the things because, besides, I mean, there isn't just physical abuse, there's mental and emotional abuse. And some victims experience mental and emotional abuse and don't realize they actually are being abused. They think it has to be physical to really count as abuse, and that's just not true. In fact, the mental and emotional abuse is harder to recover from than the physical abuse. So victims believe if they cause the violence, they should also be able to stop it, which of course is absolutely not true. Um, they're also made to think they can't survive on their own, uh, financially or otherwise. And often abusers do create a financial situation that makes leaving nearly impossible. Um, the woman might be completely financially dependent on the man. And of course, she's going to think, how am I going to take care of myself? And, if kids are involved. And, but they also isolate their victims from family and friends. so that they don't feel like they can, reach out. And usually the woman is embarrassed or ashamed, and so she doesn't tell anyone about it. Um, and that makes it even, more difficult. So a victim can become extremely isolated. Survivors sometimes want the abuse to end, but not the relationship. Uh, so, a lot of times the people, the woman, or excuse me, the person might really be in love with the person that is abusing them. They just really want the abuse to stop. And that's why they might keep returning, because they feel that's the person they fell in love with, and they believe their promises to change. And they'll, they will say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and blah, blah, blah. And of course, make excuses, even though there's no excuse for the abuse. But the thing is, you keep hoping, and no, I did at first, that it's going to change. And so it's not easy for someone to let go of, their hopes and their dreams. And so these are a lot of reasons why women, don't leave or keep returning to, an abusive situation. In my case, I actually did not return. Um, I stayed out of, the relationship, but I was in two abusive relationships. So I guess I returned to being abused just with a different person. So eventually what I did is I looked at that and I said, you know, why, you know, why did I get, despite what I felt were my best efforts, did I continue to be in a, abusive relationship, but with someone else? And why didn't I just walk away the first time? Um, the, my second abuser, hit me. And of course, I would ask myself that question for a while, and eventually came to the conclusion that if if I had felt good about myself, or any person that, if you've ever met someone, especially a woman who's, confident and secure in her own self and knows who she is and feels good about that, these are not women who are likely to get into this type of situation. And so that's the sad thing, is that the abuser, um, beats you down even more in terms of your self-esteem. And I mean, they might, like in my case, call me names, um, and put you down, make you feel like you're incompetent, inept, um, and those types of things. So that makes it, again, like I said, even harder to get out. And if you're not, um, if you're being isolated from family and friends, you don't have anyone else to tell you, the truth. And but even if you do talk to people, they'll tell you, wow, you should leave and everything, and then you might make excuses for the person, and it's very difficult. So there's a lot of reasons, again, for people, not leaving, for staying, for keeping and returning. And so, the one of the things that's really important to me about talking about my experience is so I could help someone that might be in this experience, or who's trying to heal from it, because obviously during that time when they're leaving, there's the possibility that someone might go back. So it's really important, to have support and help. And and I always feel like it's important to stand as, as an example of someone saying, I can do it. Um, it's usually, if someone they gives you advice and they tell you this and that, but they've never been in the situation. And so I think it's really important to for people to see that, yeah, I've been through this and I came out of it and I'm, actually flourishing and doing well. And now that more and more women, are coming out and sharing their stories, obviously, uh, decades ago, this just didn't happen. And women stayed. Women were encouraged to stay in a abusive, relationship. Um, some, people like a woman might go to her mother and tell her about it. She say, "Well, you made your bed, you need to lie in it," or whatever. And so even society as a whole has created a certain type of socialization that that causes women to, stay in this kind of relationship. We're not usually, aggressive and assertive and that kind of thing. We're taught to be more, well, actually, decades ago when I was little, to be sugar and spice and everything nice. So I don't believe that holds as much anymore. I certainly, the one thing I can say about my experience is that I have become very feisty. Um, I was actually bullied in high school too, and that has contributed, to my, speaking out more, because I remember how painful that was and how, um, it was just really, and when you're a teenager, you don't have the wherewithal to really deal well with that kind of thing. You're usually feeling really insecure, about yourself. And I was like always different. And as a teenager, you don't want to be different. And it took me a long time to embrace my differentness. I don't think that's a word, I just made it up. But um, anyway, that's how I felt about it. And and that's not even in my 60s, I still have times when I don't, feel secure, or I give myself, a hard time. Women are very critical of themselves. The difference is, though, I have the tools and the experience to be able to catch myself and say, wait a minute, that's not true. You should not talk to yourself that way. We would never talk to our friends or family the way we talk to ourselves. So why do we talk to ourselves that way? And so that is, the good thing. I'm only human. I do still have my flaws, and I try to do the best that I can to improve them. But we can, only do so much, which actually brings me to the, what I mentioned before, that we keep thinking the person, because they say, and we hope they're going to change. But again, people can only change so much. And an abuser would have to go through some serious therapy to get to the point where they possibly would not become abusive in a relationship again. But a lot of times they're not acknowledging and recognizing that they are abusive. So that, that's an issue too. Obviously, there's a lot of psychology around all of, you know, this type of thing. And I'm talking about, being abused in a relationship. And of course, there's other things like child abuse and, being sexually abused and those kind of things. And they're all awful, and nobody should have to go through that. And it's something that you can, it's going to take a while to be able to recover from that and, rise above it. And the thing I think is really important too is to be really patient with yourself and, forgive yourself when you backstep or, take two steps back and one step forward, or that's life. So be kind to yourself. As I said, we're so critical of ourselves, and we need to be kind to ourselves and to each other and support each other. And, and that's all part, and forgiving the person, is all part of the healing process. And I remember when I came to the point where I felt like I thought about forgiving the person. And the hard thing about that is, you might still be angry or resentful, but the forgiveness part is not for them, it's for yourself. Just it's about letting go, because I realized, wow, this anger and hurt and all that is hurting me. He it's not doing anything to him. He doesn't care, it was about helping myself, part of my healing process. And I think that's an important thing to recognize about, going through the whole thing that you do after you leave an abusive, relationship. So, and just to remember that you're doing that for yourself. Because if you hold on to that anger, the animosity and resentment, it's just going to eat you alive. And that is not going to help the healing process. Again, that forgiveness is easier said than done. And again, all of this is a process, and we all have to, um, go at it in our own separate, whatever works for us. I really believe that's important. What works for me might not work for you, but the learning, to build up your self-esteem and your self-confidence is key to healing, and then staying out of those types of relationships. Um, just to give you an idea, I was, let's see, I was 26 when I left my second abusive relationship, and that was back in 1982. So it was a long time ago. And, but, the interesting thing was I've been writing about this. And even though, I've healed and forgiven, it did bring some things up for me. And actually, what came up for me is that um, I actually felt um, a lot of um, sympathy and love for my younger self, and forgiving, obviously forgiving myself. I mean, I was hard on myself, not just because I'd gotten into the relationship and been abused myself. I was really hard on myself for exposing my kids to that. I felt really guilty for a very long time. And that was something that was really hard for me to forgive myself about. So this process can take years, and I realized that um, I think what happened when I was writing about it, it was like all of a sudden it was in my brain again, Technicolor, because we do the process, learn to forgive, but we don't ever forget. And that those scenes of abuse, we can recall them very clearly, like they are in Technicolor. And so that's why the other things are so important for us to do, and the work, because again, we won't ever forget that. And it's a part of our life and who we are. Um, I have been reading these stories of some of these amazing women who have been in even worse situations than mine, not to discount my experience, but and they have come out of it and not just healed, but they are trying to help other people, women heal, as well, and they're making that an important part of their life journey. And I I personally think it's really important to give back in whatever way, um, that you can. It might be small or it might be um, a big thing, but helping others and helping to change my important passion is to change the paradigm for women, and one of those things is the abuse stories. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there were no more stories, about abuse, that it never happened again? Being human, that's unlikely, but I think by putting it out there and talking about it, um, it it puts a real light on it and shows that this is something that really happens and it shouldn't be behind doors anymore. And the more people that are aware of it and we shine a light on it, then that's the more people that hopefully won't get in that situation in the first place, or won't take 7 times going back if they are, and just leave for good and move on with your life, because we all have something important to give, and it's really important that we share and let other people know about this, whether uh, it's physical, mental, emotional, sexual, child abuse, whatever it is. And because there's no reason to have any shame. I remember feeling that shame and embarrassment. And then I said, wait a minute, I didn't do anything wrong. We haven't done anything wrong, as much as our abuser might blame it on us. That's just their modus operandi. But we haven't done anything wrong. And there should be no, embarrassment around it. And that's why it's so great that we're out there talking about it. And I openly talk about it. And yeah, sometimes it makes people uncomfortable. But that if that's, if that's what has to happen for us to open more eyes and change the situation, then some people are just going to have to feel uncomfortable. But you know, changing the situation, making it better, helping people heal is way more important than some people feeling uncomfortable. And I I have a coaching business, and when I first thought about it, I said, you're supposed to work. People suggest, oh, do something that you have experience with, that you're, familiar with. And I thought, okay, well, I have lots of experience, but what is it? And I realized my experience had been with setting boundaries, starting with leaving abusive relationships, and setting boundaries with grown children and grandchildren and so on. Um, and so that's why I decided to focus on that. A lot of times we think about setting boundaries as saying no to our girlfriend about helping her for the umpteenth time to get ready for the party she's always throwing. And that is also something that we want to set boundaries about if it is, affecting us, causing resentment or that kind of thing. I call setting boundaries in abusive relationships, setting boundaries in critical situations. So there are all kinds of areas in which we can set boundaries, and um, it's another story. But I've had to set some serious boundaries with my kids, and as I said, my grandkids, as they grew up. Um, so it's not just about uh, what people typically, think of. And for anyone who has grown children, you know that it can be very challenging. So that's all I'll say about that. Wendy, did you have any questions?
I had lots of questions, but I think what we should do is we should focus in on the exercise that you want to share with people.
Okay. Well, basically, when I'm, before I'm working with someone, I give them a questionnaire and, I'm trying to find out what exactly, their issue is, for how long has it been going on, and what have they tried um, before, and, what has worked and what hasn't. That's in terms of setting boundaries. But in terms of working on their self-confidence and their, self-esteem, and that self-worth, and self-respect, what I call the four pillars of our self-concept. I ask, questions about um, how, get them to think about themselves, and, what their gifts are, for one thing. And another thing is, we don't, again, as women, we don't value ourselves enough. So I have them think about some things, what they might have done where, they made a difference, and they just really, we don't acknowledge that to ourselves. If we really think about all the amazing things that we have done, um, and they're incredible, but women tend to downplay that. So it's like, um, oh well, we're just doing what we do. But I like to bring those kind of things to light and make people really think about them. Um, and so it's, asking a lot of those kind of questions to, to be revealing, those kind of things. And just like the uh, healing from abuse, it's all a process. So you have to really dig deep and ask questions so that people can make people think about things. How about, how I would ask questions about how they might, have felt in different um, times during their, experience, and ask them, did you think, because, looking back, what is it? They say hindsight is 2020. I mean, do you think that was really true? Like, if your abuser told you that you were no good and worthless, I mean, is that really true? Or is that just something that they said, to make you feel bad? Um, so again, that's something to bring a light to, about how through that feeling might have been, and it might have been true at that time. But obviously, going through the healing process, you need to look at those kind of things, and they may be hard. They're going to be difficult, and you might have to admit things about yourself, like the questions I asked myself. Wow, if I felt good about myself, would I have gotten into these relationships twice? So those are just some of the questions that I might ask someone, to get them to really think um, about, you know, where they're at the moment, and then also where they want to be. Like, so, how do you, what would the optimal situation look like to you, if everything was to be, what you would like it to be? And so what's your, scenario for that, and kind of, map that out. Um, and those are just some of the strategies that I would use.
What is something that someone could do now if they find themselves in that situation?
Well, I know it's difficult, but if you can reach out to someone that you know and trust and talk to them about it, um, you might think that they're going to be, judgmental. And again, there's that shame thing. But if they truly care about you, they're going to listen and they're going to try to help. If that's not possible, obviously what they can do is do some research, do some reading um, about uh, people's experiences and to find out, what they went through. And because we always, when we go through these difficulties, we always feel like we're alone, and knowing there's other people is is really helpful. And then, of course, listening to women actually talk about their lived experiences and things like the Trauma and Abuse Summit, I think is just, actually seeing people and listening to women talking about their experience, I think is really, really important. And I believe that is probably a big reason why you do this.
Mm.
So that's another thing that I would suggest. And that, might help you get to the point where, yeah, you can reach out if you weren't able to before. And obviously, if you have access to a therapist or, something like that, then that's also, very helpful. So there's a lot of things that someone can do, but it all comes to, down to having that support.
That's great. Catherine, thank you very much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome.
How can people get
Thank you,
hold of
Wendy.
you?
Um, the best way to get a hold of me is to email me at info at empoweredtobeyourbest.com. So that the name of my business is Empowered to Be Your Best, and then it's .com.
Great.
Or you can go to my website. There's a contact form, www.empoweredtobeyourbest.com.
That's great, Catherine. Thank you very much. I'll also pop it below the video as well so people can find it easily.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy.
Take care.
You too. Bye bye.